Hello and welcome to the first public engagement session for the Active Travel Scheme on Kingsley Road in Toxteth. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. We really do appreciate it. During this session, we will hear from some of the key decision makers within the council, and we will also hear from the team who are helping to design the new infrastructure on Kingsley Road. So let me just explain who we are and how this session will work. My name is Camilla Mankabardi and I am the Communications Director for Liverpool City Council, and I will be your host for this engagement session. If you've got a comment, a question or a suggestion, please start typing them into the chat box now, and I will make sure the panel hear what you have to say. So let me introduce you to the panel. So we're joined by Karen Agbabiaka, our Interim Chief Highways Officer for Liverpool City Council. Hi, Karen. We're also joined by one of Karen's colleagues. His name is Mufu Juarawajo. He's a divisional manager in the Highways and Transportation team. And working closely with Karen and Mufu is John Booth, who is the Technical Director of ACOM. So let me just give you a little background and context to this scheme. As you all probably know, there's been a substantial investment in Toxteth recently. In fact, £1.3 million has been spent to upgrade Kingsley Road's road surface, the curbs, the footways, the crossings, the drainage, and of course the signage. And the council has also taken this opportunity to incorporate the pop-up cycle lane. So what this consultation really is all about is three key things. And this is really why we want to hear from you and we want your views on this. So the first thing that we're really consulting on is making the road one way. That's northbound from Princes Avenue and Upper Parliament Street. We also want to hear from you about the possibility of introducing a 20-mile-per-hour limit, introducing formal parking and loading places. And also we want to hear your thoughts around the pop-up cycle lane, about whether that could be made safer or made permanent. So just a little bit of food for thought there. Let me now hand over to John Booth. John has got a short presentation regarding the scheme. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Camilla. Hopefully you can all hear me fine. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's session. As Camilla said, my name's John Booth. I work for a design consultancy called ACOM, and we provide independent, impartial design advice on schemes. So if we could just move on to the next slide, please. I think it's important to note that there are two elements to it. Camilla's just touched on this. The first element, which I'm glad to report is complete, is the highway improvement works, which saw the carriageway being resurfaced and the footways replaced, amongst other things. And then the second point, which is probably the main point, is the active travel element. So if we could move on, please. So I think the question is you know, what is active travel and why is it important? And the way I think about this is active travel is really central government policy and local authority policy and guidance, which results in changes within the road network, which encourage less reliance on motor vehicle use. So active travel effectively, therefore, then promotes healthier travel choices. It's good for us. It's good for our mental well-being, particularly during a pandemic time. And there is also the benefit that there are environmental benefits, because if we're using the car less, there's less carbon emissions, and that generally means that air quality improves as well for us locally. If we could move on, please. Just thinking about the main elements of the scheme, you know, if we think about Kingsley Road actually forms part of an important cycle route. It connects the city centre to Sefton Park and vice versa. And of course, Kingsley Road has had active travel measures, albeit in the form of cycle lanes, on roads since at least 2008. So one of the things we're trying to do is enhance that. We recognise that the initial pop-up work in the form of bollards. That was perhaps a bit of a maintenance issue and needed to be more robust. And also we recognise that there are a multitude of different needs along Kingsley Road, different users. So rather than displace those, we're actually trying to encourage them. And if I can just touch on just for a moment some of the key features of the proposal. There is a blue badge provision. So outside the health centre, there are actually 3 on-street parking bays being provided. For the first time, we've provided designated loading bays for the convenience shops along Kingsley Road. There is formal parking being provided as well. You know, we've created around 48 formal parking spaces. 3 are for blue badge, 6 are for taxis, but the remainder 39 are actually for the community's use. We try to, parking around schools is obviously very important, so we've formalised parking arrangements around the school which fronts Kingsley Road. We've also introduced, Camilla mentioned, a 20-mile-an-hour speed restriction. The reason we've done that is more to do with prevention rather than reduction. Obviously, if you were unfortunate enough to be involved in a road collision, then a car travelling at 20 miles an hour, it's much less likely to result in a fatality compared to, say, 30, or even cars travelling beyond above 30 miles an hour. The reason why there's a one-way is simply because there isn't enough space to cater for all these different demands. So by introducing a one-way, we effectively free up space, i.e. the space that was used for traffic travelling southbound, and we can reallocate that to other needs and try and incorporate them as much as we can. We've also improved all the footways. That's important because active travel isn't just about cycling, it's about pedestrians as well. So moving along Kingsley Road should be a lot easier now. The carriageway is being resurfaced, and the cycle lanes have been enhanced. You know, they've been they're brand new with new features associated with them. And perhaps one of the most important points is how we're doing this. So the ETRO, which stands for an Experimental Traffic Regulation Order, is a very flexible mechanism to allow us to listen to the feedback that we get about the scheme and quickly modify the scheme where that's appropriate, obviously balancing all those competing and different demands. If we could move on, please. A picture tells, or paints rather, 1,000 words. And I think if you just look at this section of the proposal, this is the section, Princes Avenue Junction is just to your right of the screen. You can see to the right and left of the screen, you've got community parking spaces, but you've also got the blue badge parking spaces in the middle of the screen, and the yellow bays marked on the road are actually the taxi bays. And I think when you look at that section of Kingsley Road, you start to appreciate just how much of this different demand you're trying to cater for and balancing these sometimes competing demands for road space. If we could move on, please. And so I think in summary, there's kind of three points to this. One is we're recognising Kingsley Road being part of an important cycle route with existing active travel measures on, and we're trying to enhance that. I think the second thing is we're not trying to displace demand. So if there are other demands from other users on Kingsley Road, we're actually trying to accommodate them within the scheme. Obviously, there are challenges with that, which I'm sure we'll discuss. And the third and most important point is the ETRO that I referred to earlier offers a really flexible approach to how we deliver this. There's a 6-month consultation period, and it's quite easy to modify the scheme where it's appropriate. And thank you very much. That's my overview.
Cheers, John. That is really helpful, and I hope that's given the viewers of this session just a bit of an understanding of why some of the decisions have been taken. We're getting some questions in, which is fantastic. Now's your time to please type them into the chat bar and we'll go through them. So let's just go to Paul initially. So Paul was saying, look, is this session going to be recorded? How do we share this? Yep, this session is being recorded. All of the details will be on Liverpool City Council's YouTube page, and we will share the details with you. So please don't worry about that. So look, we've got a really interesting question from Ed Goman, who's watching the session at the moment. So Ed is asking, when will the counting of bikes and cars actually start? Who's going to do it? and how long will that process run for? So Ed's saying one of the criticisms that people always say is that no one uses the cycle lane, so the evidence needs to be out there. Really interesting question, Ed. Let me put that to Karen. So Karen, are we going to be counting the number of bikes and cars? Are you sharing that information? What's the plan?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, because that often doesn't happen. So technically, we normally count vehicles and not cars. So this is a new approach, and discussion around the technical aspects and collating that information has been had. So yes, we will be gathering information throughout the period in terms of the numbers of cyclists, also motor vehicles as well, because we need to understand how the street's operating since all the new measures have been installed. So yes, we will be collating the information, and that will form part of our decision at the end of this process, and we will share that. And once we've collated that information, we will share it. I'll hand you over to John and Mufu, who can tell you exactly how we're going to share it in terms of the intervals when we will share the information to the rest of the general public.
Okay, well, let's go to you, Mufu. Anything you want to add to Karen's answer there, please?
Yes, thank you. That is a very, very good question, because one of the things about using the experimental order, it gives us the opportunity to actually monitor the scheme whilst it's live, and then using the information that we gather, and we have already started in terms of monitoring what's happening since the scheme started, to understand how people are using it, what the issues are, if there are more accidents and things like that, and actually how many people are actually leaving their cars behind and then diverting onto cycling or walking. So yes, we will be doing that. We started doing that, and that will form part of the decision that we'll be making at the end, just to demonstrate whether the scheme, in terms of it being on the ground, is something that we should make permanent, or whether we should make further changes to it, going forward.
Thank you, Mufu. John, anything you'd like to add? I mean, I think that's one of the criticisms that we're seeing quite often, isn't it? How do we know if these cycle lanes are being used?
Yeah, I mean, just a minor point, really. Don't mean to go into too much detail, but we deploy various different types of surveys that collect traffic speed information. We deploy surveys that collect traffic composition. So as Karen was saying there about looking at the different types of vehicles, and this includes cyclists as well. So some of that has already been done, and some of that is planned to be done. And the mechanism to feed that back will be through a series of meetings that I'm sure we're going to touch on going forward. When we're holding exhibitions, etc., we can actually use that forum to feed back the information that we're collecting. I would just add one thing, Camilla, something very close to my heart: road safety. And that is, some of these schemes are not always justified on, I mentioned earlier, for example, prevention rather than reduction. So sometimes measures are put in place to reduce severity. So in the case of a 20 mile an hour, it's not necessarily being done because there's a major problem. It's being done because if a situation occurred where a collision, let's say, involved a young child, there is a school on Kingsley Road, for example, occurred, the likelihood of that resulting in a fatality would be significantly reduced to, say, if vehicles were traveling at 30 miles an hour or above. So sometimes it's about the numbers and demonstrating the numbers have improved. Sometimes it's about prevention as well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I want to talk to our two council colleagues. I want to stick with this issue of the number of bikes. So we've had another question where someone's saying, what's the definition of success or failure of the scheme? Is there an optimum number of bikes on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis? I'm going to start with Mufu, and then after you, Mufu, let's go to Karen. So Mufu, have you got a number in your head and you're thinking, if we hit that number, it's great, it's a successful scheme?
No, I think it'd be wrong of me to actually put a figure in terms of the number of cyclists that are going to be using this particular section. Active travel is a lot more than just the number of cyclists. It includes how people are actually using the network. It's about well-being. It's about people leaving their vehicles and using alternative modes. So in terms of the cycle number, we have to look across the whole of the city council, because whereas on Kingsley Road itself, because it's a section of the wider network, you might not necessarily get a lot of people using it, but you could get a lot of people using other section of the network, and this could actually form part of the link. So it's more about how people use the whole of the cycle network, and using some of the lessons that we're going to learn and some of the results from the survey from Kingsley Road that would then determine whether we make this permanent or not going forward.
Thanks, Mufu. Anything you want to add, Karen, to that?
Yeah, I suppose just to add, so as Mufu touched on, so Kingsley Road is part of a cycle link across the city, and the cycle network that we are starting to roll out, and active travel is a key element of in terms of our priorities. I think what we also need to realise is that it's about sharing the space and balancing the needs of all those people that need to use the highway. So we have many modes, and it's about balancing the modes and giving others the choice to whether they walk, whether they cycle, or whether they use their cars. And it's getting that balance right. So we wouldn't technically always have a number in mind. I suppose the analogy that I would use was that build it and they will come. So the more that people see of cycling facilities on our highway, the more they see that the road speeds are reduced, and the more they see cyclists using the cycles, the more they're going to feel encouraged to get on their bikes themselves and cycle in those lanes. So it's about consistent modal shifts to get the benefits for all of us, as Mufu said, for your health and well-being, whether it's for leisure, whether it's commuting. There's so many benefits from having segregated cycle facilities on a road. So it's about balancing all the modes and getting that right. So no numbers would dictate whether it's a failure or a success.
Thanks, Karen. And I'd be really interested to hear from people watching this session whether you've been encouraged to get on your bike because the infrastructure's there. There's obviously that challenge from Karen. If it's there, you'll probably start using it. If some of you on this call do that, then obviously let us know. I want to move the conversation now away from bikes for a moment and about the one-way system. So we've got an anonymous resident of our city who's messaged in to say, why have you made the road one way? I'm just not clear on this. I'm going to start with you, John. Tell us your thoughts on this.
Okay. I think we've used, we've made the point before. I think I touched on it certainly that one of the things we want to do with the scheme is not displace needs. We want to try and consolidate them. We want to try and cater for them as much as we possibly can. So from a design point of view, there's only so much space, and it's how you utilize that space in the most efficient and effective way. Kingsley Road has a variable road width along it. In other words, it's not a constant width. And when you put in place cycle lanes, and when you put in place parking, the parking that I talked about before, about community parking, blue badge parking, etc., that all takes up a certain amount of space, and then there's a residual amount left for what general traffic using it. In the case of Kingsley Road, when you look at the setup of Kingsley Road, if you want to cater formally for parking, whether that be community parking, loading, blue badge parking, whatever form it takes, when you look at the overall dimensions and when you start designing the proposal up, you quickly realise that the road is simply not wide enough to accommodate all those requirements as well as two-way traffic. So the best thing to do in that particular instance is to consider alternative ways of dealing with that traffic, in this particular case a one-way, and that extra space that you've created by introducing a one-way can then be better allocated to other users to try and provide a more balanced proposal rather than just focusing on one particular element. Now, there are some challenges with that as well, and that's why we're on the call, and that's why we'll be holding the exhibitions, because we realise that although there's lots of benefits, there's perhaps some pain that might be associated with that, we're keen to hear from people to see how we can better deal with that and integrate it. And as Mufu mentioned earlier, the ETRO process allows a really flexible approach to allow us to consider those issues and modify the scheme where appropriate. I have got lots of facts and statistics here, Camilla, but that's the overall reasoning behind it.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I think just sort of keeping it sort of jargon free and data free for now is really helpful, John. I'm going to go to Mufu next. So Kader's written in and he's basically saying, look, no one's happy with this one-way traffic decision. Just how do you respond to that? You've got some very unhappy residents now as a result of this, Mufu.
I think it's important that we recognize that a lot of people are not going to be happy with what we've done. So using the experimental order, as I said earlier on, it gives us the opportunity to revisit the scheme, to see based on what people are saying, if we can actually make further changes to it. Now, the thing about experimental order is because it's legal, it means that the council has to take on board what people are saying and present it back to committee and for committee to actually make a decision on. If it's the case that we can make those changes, we will make changes to the scheme, revisit some of the issues people are raising. And if not, we have to go back to people and say, actually, we can't make the changes they're suggesting for this reason. So we might have to remain with what we currently have. But I just want to give people assurance that whatever comment that they make during this process will definitely be taken on board, and where we can make changes, we'll make changes to the scheme, which is a different way of doing things. Because normally, if you do things permanently, that is it. You probably won't visit it for another 3, 4, 5 years. But here, we're guaranteeing that within the year, we'll revisit the scheme and we'll make changes accordingly where we think it's appropriate for us to do so. So, but in one way, yes, we will look at it and we'll definitely be, if we can, make changes. If not, then we'll go back to people and tell them why we can't make those changes.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Mufu. And I think you've kind of answered Kader's second question about why weren't people given a vote about this change. But you've made it clear that this is a temporary decision at the moment. You want people's views. That's why we're having the session. And obviously, if people don't like it, it's worth having a chat with your ward councillors, having a chat with Councillor Dan Barrington, who's the portfolio holder for transport, and they will feed that into the decisions that they take. OK, that was very helpful. Let's just move on to then a broader topic. And I think, again, look, we've covered it a little bit, but let's talk to Karen. Karen, so somebody else has said, look, is this all permanent? And I think Mufu's just given us that indication that it's not permanent. What's your thinking on timescales here, Karen?
Yeah, so as we've explained earlier, the experimental traffic order has to be in for a minimum of 6 months and a maximum of 12 months. So the 6 month period ends on the 20th of June. So what we have decided is that we will collate all the information received, and you have to submit it formally to us using the email on screen now. Provide us with your feedback, and then what will then happen after the 6 months period, we'll analyse the feedback, we review the feedback, and then we'll collectively, internally, with our consultants, determine what the issues are, and what the pros and cons are for some of the issues, and then basically come back with a proposal. So what could happen at the end of this period is a number of things. So what we can decide to do is either remove the scheme in totality, because that's what people feel. We could make amendments and changes, and we'll come back and feed through those amendments and changes, or we could leave the scheme as it is. So we've got between the 6 months and the 18 months for us to go through that period, to go back to the community if there are any concerns, and work with the community to actually design and build a scheme for the community, incorporating some of those changes. So what we are committed to is it's not permanent. it's experimental. We didn't consult on you because this is our consultation period now, the 6-month period. So if we feel that there's certain elements that don't quite work, that need to be adjusted, you know, we will come back to the community, engage with the community and feed back into our decision making. So there will be some drop-in sessions, exhibitions. Hopefully COVID will improve, so we were able to do those in person. And you can meet with my team and my consultants and really engage and discuss so that we can really have a community-based design that fits majority of people, that works for majority of people, but also gives us the benefits of active travel and having cycling facilities that I think we greatly need in this side of the city.
John mentioned the blue badge parking facilities a little while ago, Karen, and we've had a message from somebody who's written in to say they don't think there was a great deal of thought around the taxi ring. So they're saying the taxi ring was placed for the old people's home, and there's no reason as it's placed away from the home. So he doesn't sort of think that makes any sense. They're also saying the blue badge parking, there's an allocation inside the GP car park. So they don't think any research has been done. So there's a little bit of an issue there. You know, did you really think through the blue badge parking, Karen?
Yeah, I mean, I think John mentioned earlier, it's really difficult for us to accommodate and incorporate everyone's needs. But as a local authority, we do need to provide some on-street parking because, say, for example, particularly for disabled, if there's insufficient space within the car park, then where do those with blue badge holders that have difficulty manoeuvring around the highway, where do they stop off? So by formalising and providing a minimum, I think, of 3 gives us more of an opportunity and more of a balance to accommodate all road users. We've also incorporated drop curbs, and a lot of people with you know, impairments really struggle to walk on our high streets and our roads. So, you know, by incorporating drop curbs, blue badge parking, we're really trying to just balance the needs. So if we feel as a result of the consultation that there's too much, they're not in the right location, then we can make those changes and we can adapt to make sure that they're appropriate for the environment. You've got to appreciate that we don't live in the area and we understand that. You know, I've been to Kingsley Road, my colleagues have, we understand some of the issues down there, but we're not there 24/7. So, you know, at midnight, I don't know the issues, or early morning. So we do rely on our residents to be able to feedback and tell us what the issues are, because we obviously don't have all the issues, or we don't even know what the pros and cons will be. So we really do want to hear from as many of you as possible. So please do formally feedback your comments and we will take them on board.
Perfect segue, Karen, into a comment from Jeremy Hawthorne. So Jeremy says that he has both driven and cycled down Kingsley Road. He thinks the cycle lanes are an improvement, but he's got a bit of a worry. He says the curbstones separating the cycle from the car are a real hazard for the cyclist. John, I'm going to ask you, Jeremy says, can you mark up those curbstones so that they're more visible at night time?
Yeah, there's a role for Jeremy in consultancy, I think, here. I mean, it's something that's been flagged up even before we installed the scheme. So the product we've used, which is a Cycle Defender, is an off-the-shelf product. So it's an approved product, and within it, there is built into that a reflectivity strip. We have considered about enhancing that reflectivity strip. So some of them, for example, had some additional white row markings placed on them as a bit of an experiment to see if that would help as well. So the product that's being put down is a product that's used across the country, and we haven't had any particular issues with it. But like the observation that's being made, we've challenged ourselves to say, can we make it more visible? Can we make it more conspicuous? And that's something we are currently looking at the minute. In fact, the trial has already been undertaken regarding putting additional row markings on them, but we haven't made a decision because again, Camille, sometimes you can over egg the pudding a little bit with this stuff. So again, just striking that balance between not making it look too visually intrusive, but at the same time ensuring that it is safe and fit for purpose.
Mufu, I want to turn to you, please. A really good question from Amina, who's watching this session today. So thanks, Amina, for taking the time out. John, at the very start of the session, talked about safety, and that was why a lot of the features have been brought in. But Amina's querying that. She's saying, if it's all about safety, why have you placed parking to open onto ongoing traffic?
I think it's important to note what John said earlier on in terms of the road space. There is issues around the parking and where people park along Kingsley Road. Previously, people would normally park on the footway. They will park in the cycle lane. So what we recognize that people still need parking along Kingsley Road. What we've done is actually mark out, which is very unusual, mark out specific areas where people can park on Kingsley Road. In that case, and they're also separated so that if people want to cross the road, they can actually cross the road and looking in one direction, because it's now one way, which with the reduced speed feature that we've incorporated within the scheme, that makes it a lot safer for people to actually cross the road. Unfortunately, we can't put the parking on the curbside because the cycle lanes are segregated, and we just have to put them at the safest locations along the road. But they are marked out. They are marked out, and there are gaps between the parking bays so that people can safely cross the road, which is probably not the same the situation previously. So we've done our best to make it as safe as possible. Not only that, we've enhanced the crossing locations. Karen mentioned the drop curbs that we've incorporated within the scheme itself. The other thing also is that for people cycling along Kingsley Road, now because people are not parking on the footway, which in itself is dangerous for people that are walking and for the elderly, it also means that cyclists can actually progress without being blocked and then moving out all of a sudden into the headway of moving vehicles. So we've done our best to make it as safe as possible, and we do rely on drivers behaving and driving accordingly at 20 miles an hour. But with some of the legislation that is coming forth in terms of moving traffic offences, once we are able to get that, we'll be able to actually enforce that ourselves rather than relying on police to do that. So again, that's another feature that will be coming in further down the line to make it even more safer than it is at the moment.
Thanks, Mufu. I'm going to stick with parking and I'm going to turn to you, Karen, please. So you've made it clear it's a temporary infrastructure at the moment, and obviously decisions will be made as to whether it's permanent. Somebody's written in though to say, will there be enforcement of parking restrictions on Kingsley? They've seen that some who used to park in the cycle lane are now using the designating parking bays, which is great, but there are other cars who've not got a designated bay directly outside their home, and they're still doing what they used to do, but now they're parking in the middle of a cycle lane. And I know Mufu's been looking there a little bit, and he's mentioned about the difficulties of cyclists having to move into the middle of the road. But what about that enforcement side, Karen? Are we looking at that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that's great feedback. So please do write in formally. We will capture the questions as well, but if you could please do write in formally as well with a bit more detail, that would be really handy. So yes, so enforcement was one of the elements that never happened on Kingsley Road, and the reason why it didn't happen, because with enforcement you need to have a legal document called a traffic order. So with this experimental traffic order, which is the legal document, allows us to enforce and issue tickets to those that are not abiding by the highway rules. So yes, there is enforcement. The enforcement team are aware of the issues, and it will form part of their patrols, or it is forming part of their patrols. So if we can get some feedback about times of days when there's issues, then obviously the enforcement team can visit the location during those difficult times where where people are not abiding by the rules. But having this experimental order gives us the ability to enforce and hopefully reduce those issues and those problems with those parked vehicles And also, we also want to just make sure that we do have adequate parking. So if you do have any views on the parking locations and spaces, if you feel that they're not sufficient, they're not in the right place, then please do tell us. And obviously we can consider those options and look for other provisions as well.
Thanks, Karen. John, you've worked on many similar schemes to this one. I'm going to put this question to you. Someone said there's probably some resident engagement that's quite specific that they think should take place, in that people who are still parking there need to understand that when they open the car doors, they could be a danger to the cyclists, and the cyclists need to be in the loop of that as well. So what are your thoughts on that, John?
Well, it's another great question, and it's kind of slightly aligned to the parking question, sorry, the enforcement question that Karen was touching on, because I think one of the things we've tried to do as a team is first, we're trying to educate, we're trying to provide information to the community about how this scheme would work and operate. This session is a great example of that. And as Karen said, we're going to have some face-to-face sessions as well, where we can get really under the skin of it. We want people to use their driveways, and of course, then it needs to be adequate. But the cycle design guidance does talk about a margin strip between where vehicles are parked and the cycle lane. And again, because of the limitations in road width, what we've tried to do is we've tried to introduce that wherever possible. So it's not a case of it has to be in place. It's a case of it's a nice to have. So where we can get it in place, we have, and where we can't get it in place, that is just the case. This kind of brings us back to the 20-mile-an-hour point that I was trying to make earlier, which, to be fair, I led on the point about it's not reduction, it's prevention. But I think if you just think about the 20-mile-an-hour being an overarching design principle, because what 20-mile-an-hour schemes do, when traffic travels at 20 miles an hour or below, remember, that's the maximum limit. It doesn't mean you travel at that speed. You travel at suitable for the conditions of the road. Your ability to respond to a situation increases significantly. So if you're a driver and you lose concentration, then if someone's crossing the road, they've got more reaction time. Likewise, people can be quite a bad judge of distance and time. So by the traffic being slower, the person rather than the driver also has more reactionary time. And if you put them two things together, where you get a particular situation, a lot of which can't be predicted, but leads to the potential for there to be an issue, the likelihood of that issue coming about as a result of a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit being in place is significantly reduced. So I think, a combination of the 20-mile-an-hour, a combination of the feedback from both cyclists using the cycle lane to see if that's an issue, but also say residents parking in the parking bays and seeing if that's an issue conflicting with cyclists will be very interesting to see. But at the moment, there are lots of schemes designed around the principles of what Kingsley Road has in place currently.
Cheers, John. Another question's come in. I think this one's probably for me, if you don't mind. So we're being asked how many people are on this session. So we're fluctuating between 16 and 17. Thank you to those of you who've taken the time out to join us today. This is the first of many engagement sessions. So obviously that's not a particularly high number. It's worth me also saying that 800 different people were contacted. They were told about this engagement session. It is really very genuine. We want to hear as many views as possible. Towards the end of the session, I'll give you some details about how you can lodge comments or complaints or ideas or suggestions. And Karen's already said that, COVID allowing, the plan is to have a lot of face-to-face engagement within the community. But please, tell your friends, family, residents, contacts in the area about this engagement process, and we'd love to hear their views. So let's just move on. We've got some really interesting comments from somebody else watching this. So they're saying, as a resident on Kingsley Road, I think the new layout is brilliant. I know many people who are happy with the new one-way system as well. They've seen many cyclists using the cycle lane, and obviously the more availability of safe cycling lanes means more people will be able to use them in the future. They go on to say that they're also happy with the 20-mile-per-hour limit. They don't think that's a problem at all, and they would actually prefer a road that is safer and kinder to the environment. They go on to say things do need to change in order to create positive change going forward. Cleaner air, safer roads and accessible cycle lanes to encourage more people. Well, I think those comments are a really useful way to go back to Karen. Karen, can you give us a sense of active travel? You've used that phraseology a lot. There might be some people on the call who don't really know what you mean by that. And just tell us about what the vision is. Obviously, Mayor Joanne, she's the leader of the city. What's Mayor Joanne's vision when it comes to active travel and cycling?
Yes, great question. So obviously, Mayor Joanne's vision is for us to basically put the infrastructure in to allow more active travel. So what we're looking to do, and lots of local authorities across the country are doing this, is to share the highway space and kind of get better balance across the network. So for example, buses will mean that we'll get people out of vehicles quicker, and also implementing better streets in terms of safer streets, better footways, cycling facilities. This is all the kind of definitions in terms of active travel. So what we want to do, and what mayors as tasked us with doing, is making sure that we don't design our roads just for the vehicle, for the motor vehicle, which has traditionally been what traffic engineers and highways engineers do. It's basically designing streets for the people. And as we have a target of net zero carbon by 2030, then we will have a responsibility to look at alternative modes of transport, to try and encourage, educate and try and encourage our children to be less reliant on the motor vehicle. So as Liverpool implements more cycling facilities and our youngsters get used and more convinced that alternative modes of transport are better for them, not only gets them from A to B a lot quicker, but also encourages them in terms of keeping fit and healthy. Our vision is that our streets will be more balanced for the needs of those residents, businesses, and all of those that need to come to the city. So our view and at the moment is that Kingsley Road is one of the first of many cycle facilities and active travel facilities that we will be installing across the city. Most of you would have seen the Strand and the benefits of the Strand in terms of the segregated cycle facilities on the Strand. And our vision is for us to have more connected cycle routes so that people can commute through the city, or they can use them to get to the park, cycle to the park for leisure. So it's basically just having more of a balance in terms of our streets and less reliant on the motor vehicle and more reliant on other modes of transport. So we see this as one of the key exemplars across the city, and we really want to get it right. So we do need to have understand the views of the communities, local communities, because we want to make sure that they don't feel that we're designing cycle facilities for commuters. They're not. They're for residents, they're for leisure, they're for commuting, they're for a raft of things. So we really do want to make sure that we get this right. So understanding the views of the local residents, those that are directly impacted by the infrastructure, will really enable us to understand how we take the active travel programme forward. And we are starting a campaign towards February in terms of our active travel. So we will be sharing a bit more about what Liverpool will look like in the future and how we intend to get there as well. So
that's really helpful. Thank you very much for that context, Karen. I've got a few quick fire questions. I really want to get through all of the questions that we're getting in the short time that we've got left. So John, I'm going to come to you with the first one. Jeremy Hawthorne's asked, how do the residents of Coulthart Road actually drive to South Liverpool? The access to Lodge Lane has been blocked off again.
I'm not sure I am best placed to answer that. I mean, I am familiar with Coulthart Road in the sense that it's actually part of the cycle route that I mentioned earlier between Stepton Park and the city centre would go down Kingsley Road and then up Coulthart Road, where there is a shared use cycle route. But with regard to the history of when it was closed, why it's closed, etc., I'm not able to answer that. I'm sorry.
Mufu, anything you can add?
I am probably in the same position as John, really. But I suppose, you know, it's something that we can look into and then come back to John, who asked the question. So that I think it's John Hurtley, isn't it? Yeah. I'll come back to him and give him and let him know exactly the reason why that had been done. But I haven't got that at hand at the moment.
No problem. So look, Jeremy, the team will come back to you with the specific answer on that one. Let me ask another question then. Karen, will this plan be implemented onto Lodge Lane being a dual carriageway? Do you see it expanding?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Karen.
Right, great. So, like I said, we do have a number of plans for cycle facilities, and at the moment, I don't have the details on whether we will be continuing onto Lodge Lane. It was Lodge Lane was the question, Camilla, was it?
Yes, it was, yeah.
Yeah. So we will feed back and come back on that. But there are a number of proposed routes, and at the moment, Lodge Lane's not one. I don't think that we have considered that's in the immediate plans, but we can feed back on that.
Thank you. John, I'm going to go to you next. You talked about, you know, the 20-mile-per-hour zone, etc. Kader's written in to say, but doesn't that mean drivers use more fuel and therefore that affects the environment? That's not, you know, very good. There's more carbon monoxide in the atmosphere, isn't there?
Well, it depends which research you read, I suppose. But I suppose the way I would look at it is what we've tried to do with the scheme is, you know, apart from all the different demands that we've been talking about, is to make sure that with formalised parking, you've got, you know, a fairly free-flowing route along Kingsley Road. So, you know, I think the thing with emissions and the like is really more a function of queuing as often as not. It's not as simple as this, admittedly, but you know, in very simple terms, if you can keep traffic moving at a sensible speed and you're not creating queues and congestion, then that's got to be better for the environment. So, you know, there's push and pull with options. You know, there are benefits and disbenefits, and I think, you know, the as far as I'm concerned anyway, I mean, I've headed up road safety in Greater Manchester, for example, and in districts in Greater Manchester, I should say. You know, it's clear to me what the benefits of a 20-mile-an-hour speed restriction are. I'm not saying that there aren't some disbenefits, but overall the net benefit it outweighs the disbenefits, is the way I would look at that.
Kader's just popped a little note in to say that they've collected 81 signatures on a petition that they're starting, and all of those 81 are against the scheme, and those people are just living around Kader, just around the house there. So it sounds like, you know, it would be useful for maybe Kader to go to another engagement session and maybe bring those comments with them. Ed's also written to say he actually loves the scheme and he thinks it is much safer for the cyclist. Somebody else has written in to say it would be really helpful if we could see a map of the proposed cycling master plan. It always feels like it's being dropped out of nowhere and doesn't build up a bigger picture. It feels like it's all just being made up as you go along. What's your response to that, Karen? Can we see a map, and is it just you coming up with schemes ad hoc? Is there an overall master plan?
No, there is a master plan. There was one before I joined the authority. So as I said earlier, from February, we will be launching our engagement on active travel, and we'll have all the details in there and provide with a master plan in terms of our cycle facilities. And hopefully we'll have some links to our website as well, on our web page as well, so that we can share that information. So no, we don't just make them up. We don't just pluck roads out of the air. We do have a planned approach to our cycle map. So we're happy to share as well, and have any additional meetings or discussions with anyone who would like to engage with myself or the team.
Thanks, Karen. Mufu, somebody's written in to say, how are you going to consult with residents who face a language barrier? 51.2% of residents in the area are from the BME communities, and many are not able to read letters in community languages.
What we have done is that we've engaged with the various communities in the area. For example, you know, the Somali community and all that, you know, kind of engage with them, so that through their own individual groups, they'll be able to explain the proposal to some of those that might not necessarily speak English or English being their first language. So there are other ways in which we can engage with people through the doctor's sessions. We're hoping that we'll be able to sort of identify some of those people that might not necessarily be included, and we don't want them to feel as if they're not included as part of this. Once we identify them, we'll be able to actually address some of their concerns and be able to explain the proposal in more detail with them. But the ones that we've identified, we've actually reached out to them to kind of get the various groups involved in part of this conversation, and as also as part of how we are engaging with them. You know, we've been involved in that, so we'll continue to do that throughout this 6-month period that will be consulting across the whole area.
John, a quick one for you. Somebody's saying, why are the cycle barriers inside the cycle lane and not on the line? If they were on the line, it would enable 2 cycles side by side, so an adult can cycle with a child, but it wouldn't even impact on space for cars.
So ideally cycle lanes should be 2 meters. So again, sorry to repeat myself, but we talked about balancing, you know, different demands with a limited amount of space. So the cycle lanes are 1.5, which are somewhere in the middle, but ideally, you know, you would have 2 meter wide cycle lanes. That's utopia, I suppose. What we've tried to do with the cycle defenders is not for them to encroach into the 1.5 meter area. So in other words, that 1.5 meters has been protected. Then you've got the cycle defender, and the cycle defender is marked between 2 white lines. So it's all about, well, how much space have we got and where does the defender sit? And what I've tried to do in the design is make sure that defender sits outside the 1.5 meters as opposed to within the 1.5 meters, because, you know, we might only be talking about 100 mil or 200 mil or 300 mil, but the space isn't there. You know, it all counts.
Thank you. Somebody's written in to say there really does need to be in-person consultation, as this forum does not allow for information to be challenged. As a community organisation, this is a large BME community who do not use online forums. As a result, their voices are not being heard. So I think we've mentioned a couple of times that this is a virtual and online session because when we organised this, we still had high levels of Omicron, the COVID-19 virus variant. But we are very, very hopeful that in-face, person-to-person consultations will commence next month and will be staged throughout the next 6-month period. And I'll give you details at the end if you just want to grab a pen and paper. Okay, so another comment that's come through to us. As an L8 resident and regular commuter on Kingsley Road, I applaud the brave decision to trial this layout. Can I please be assured that any negative comments during the consultation will be taken on board in the context of air pollution, climate emergency, and the very high figures for pedestrian and cyclist KSIs in Liverpool? It's sad to say that we must make changes that will inconvenience some people in the short term in order to tackle climate emergency and safeguard our children's futures. LCC must be brave and make decisions that may be unpopular for some for the benefit of all. So Mufu, let me ask you, you have a 6-month period of consultation. Let's just say 80% of the feedback is negative and 20% is positive. What will you do? Will you do what this resident wants, make some bold decisions, or will you go with the prevailing narrative?
I think obviously, you know, the council has policy and a vision of what it wants to do. And I know that, you know, we are not going to be just dismissive of what people are saying. We will take those on board. But we also have to align whatever we're doing with the as you said, the previous writer said, in terms of the climate, in terms of safety, in terms of well-being and health. So we need to ensure that, you know, if people are negative about this scheme, we need to look at the details of why they're negative about it. Is it because if they feel that, for example, it's going to increase accidents, we can allay those fears by putting additional measures in there, we will do so. So at this present time, until we see the details of what people are going to be negative about, you know, I wouldn't say commit myself to say yes or no, but whatever it is that we're going to do, or whatever people are saying, we have to align that to whatever the council and the government policy agenda is, and ensure that we're able to respond to those accordingly. So we will not necessarily be dismissive, and at the same time, of what people are saying, but we will be careful and we consider each and every one of them and then respond accordingly.
Thank you, Mufu. Karen, I'm going to turn to yourself. We've had quite a few messages from Amina from GSWG, which stands for Granby Somali Women's Group. She says they've been chasing for information and no engagement has occurred. They work with the community and many of the other BME communities. They've been doing this work for over 30 years, and she doesn't believe they've been engaged or contacted in any form to assist with this issue. So clearly Amina is not happy. What can you say to Amina, Karen?
So firstly, Amina, I'd like to say apologies if you feel that you've not been engaged. Actually, the first drop-in session was going to be at the Somali Women's Community Centre, and unfortunately, due to the COVID issue, we were unable to have it, so hence why we're here today. So I'm happy to come and engage with you personally to explain some of the benefits of the proposals we presented, but also to hear you out to understand how best to engage with your communities as a community leader. And also we're able to offer translation as well. So if you do need any information translated to get the message and the reasons why the scheme has been installed, and we're happy to provide that. But we do need people such as yourself to get the message across to those communities that sometimes are really difficult for us to get in contact with. So I'd appreciate working closely with you and others within the community to really explain the benefits of the proposals. And if we do need to make some amendments, we want to consider some of your views as well. So happy to engage personally, to come down to you and meet with your community to hear them out and to discuss some of the issues that they may be having with the proposals.
Well, I'm sure Amina would take you up on that, so we can always link yourself with Amina. Somebody else has written in to say, to residents saying that they weren't consulted, I just want to add that consultations have happened. We have received regular letters and updates in which they've asked us to feed back our thoughts and comments. This is consulting residents. They think the job's been done. We now have this session as well. And then regarding the cycling maps, they say they were also given a map of the new layout of the cycle lane to inform, and there was a request for feedback. It may well be that Amina and her colleagues and her centre have not received that, so it's probably worth us resending that. Kader has commented a couple of times saying, look, there needs to be a petition. They don't think this is working. They don't think they are being consulted. They want a proper petition with names and signatures so that we can really start getting a tally of who is pro and who's against. Mufu, is that something that you would consider, having a petition as part of the consultation process?
Yes, but the consideration of the petition will have to go through the council. Obviously, there's a certain number of people, signatory, that's got to be on the petition before the council can actually look at that. But like we said, as part of the experimental order, there will be a stage where the consultation will finish. We have to prepare a report, and that report has to be presented to the cabinet for the cabinet to make a decision. So part of that will include any petition, any objection, whatever comments people might have made at that time, we'll be presenting it to the committee, and the committee will be making decisions based on that information. Yes, we will, but unlike petitions that are dealt with separately, they need a certain number for it to be dealt with separately. If that's clear, if they want the petition to be dealt with separately, then it has to be up to a certain number. But if they want it to be included as part of the consultation of the scheme, it will be, and it will be presented to Cabinet when we're presenting our report on the scheme.
Thank you, Mufu. Derek Gould's written in to say he's in favour of a petition, and he would say it's a good idea. He's a cyclist, so he's very happy with the proposals and what's happened. We've spoken a lot about motorists, we've spoken a lot about cyclists, we've not really talked about pedestrians. GSWG, the Somali team, have contacted us again saying no additional crossings have been added, pedestrians are in the same boat as they ever were. I'm going to give this one to you, John. Was that something you considered in the design?
Yeah, like everything, Camilla, within reason, there are budgets and things. So what we've done as part of the scheme is we've renewed the zebra crossing on Kingsley Road, which it's an existing crossing, but it's effectively been, as I said, renewed. In addition to that, there's been a multitude of what we call uncontrolled crossings. So these are where the curbs are dropped and then there's yellow paving or tactile paving that's installed that helps the visually impaired, mums with prams and people with mobility problems. And sometimes that's overlooked, they're only side roads, but actually, if you can have every side road with a drop crossing, then you get the connectivity along the route as well. So that was part of the £1.3 million investment. So if you think about movement along Kingsley Road, it's a massive improvement compared to what it was. If you think about movement across Kingsley Road, we've renewed the zebra, but again, and sorry to sound like a bit of a broken record, going back to the 20-mile-an-hour point, and it's a good way of bringing this in, really. The proposal to introduce a 20-mile-an-hour speed restriction has many benefits, and one of the benefits it does is it calms down traffic. Also, the asymmetrical design of the parking bays within the scheme calms down traffic because it introduces something what we call horizontal deflection. In simple terms, drivers will pass through the area in a more calm way. The calmer manner of driving, the slower speeds mean that you actually need less formal crossing points, and the road feels a bit less vehicle dominated and favouring more towards pedestrians and cyclists. So that's one of the sort of I know I keep going on about the 20 mile an hour, but that is quite an important aspect of the or part of the proposal that's absolutely key, delivering other aspects, including some added value through the scheme as well.
Thanks, John. We've reached the end of our session. Karen is our Interim Chief Highways Officer for Liverpool. Karen, just sum it up in a sentence. It's a scheme that's got people talking and thinking. What's the big takeaway that you want our viewers to have with them as we depart?
I suppose the big takeaway is that this is consultation. This is us consulting you, and this is your opportunity to have your say and to shape the scheme. So please do feel free to feed your comments through to us. We will consider them. We have to, as part of the legal documents, the experimental order, we have to consider your views. So we will take them on board, we will analyse them, and we will come back to you with the results. It's your scheme, it's your road, so please do feel free to feedback and shape it. That's my sort of takeaway, I would say.
Thank you so much, Karen. So look, let me just let you all know that Karen's team, the Highways and Transportation team, are organising a second engagement session for next month. We're hoping that's going to be face-to-face, COVID allowing. This presentation and all of your questions will be uploaded later today on the Kingsley Road page. You can find that on liverpool.gov.uk. Please feel free to grab that link, share it with people who weren't able to attend. The scheme drawings and a frequently answered questions document is also on that page, so please do go to the website. The engagement process is going to last 6 months in total. We want to hear from you. Karen's just made that really, really clear. This is an experimental traffic order. It's not permanent. You can put all of your views online. You've got the address there, liverpool.gov.uk/Kingsley Road ETRO. Type in Kingsley Road to liverpool.gov.uk and it will come up. We want to hear from you. Thank you so much to the panel, to Karen, to Mufu and to John, but more importantly, thanks to those of you who've attended this consultation event. Goodbye.
Thank you, Camilla.